I just made a single phone call that will likely force my son and his wife out of their home. The $2,200 mortgage payment I faithfully sent on the first of every month? I stopped it. They think they can ban me from Thanksgiving and still cash my check? They are about to learn a very hard lesson. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. Just last week, none of this seemed possible. My world was orderly, peaceful, scented with the last roses of autumn. The Ohio sun was warm on my back, a gentle gift before the coming chill. My garden, my sanctuary, was a riot of color against the crisp blue sky. Each rose bush was a memory, a chapter of the life I built with my late husband, Richard. My leather-gloved hands moved with practiced ease, snipping a faded bloom here, training a stray cane there. My phone rang, chiming softly in my pocket. I smiled when I saw Marcus's name on the screen. "Hi, honey," I said, tucking the phone between my ear and shoulder. "Hey, Mom, just wanted to say thanks. The notification just came through." His voice was bright, full of the easy charm he always had. "Of course, sweetheart. Happy to help," I replied. That $2,200 was our arrangement. It was the agreement that allowed them to afford the beautiful house with the big backyard, the house that backed right up to my own property. It kept my only son close. "You're a lifesaver, Mom. Seriously. Jenna sends her thanks too. We were just talking about Thanksgiving plans. Same as always, right? You'll come over around 2 o'clock? "Wouldn't miss it for the world," I said, my heart swelling. "I'll bring my famous pecan pie, the one you loved so much as a boy." "Perfect. It's not Thanksgiving without your pie." We exchanged I love yous and hung up. I clipped a perfect deep crimson rose, a variety Richard and I had cultivated called Eternal Memory, and held it to my nose, inhaling its rich fragrance. The world felt right. My son was happy, my traditions were secure, and my roses were beautiful. I was a fortunate woman. I had no idea that the ground beneath my feet was about to crumble, or that the son whose life I was helping to build was complicit in a plan to destroy the one thing I held most dear. I was completely, blissfully, unaware of the betrayal that was already in full bloom just over the fence. The town fair was the heart of our community, the one time of year when everyone came together to celebrate the harvest. The air buzzed with the cheerful chaos of laughter, calliope music from the carousel, and the sweet, sticky scent of caramel corn. Children with painted faces ran past, clutching oversized stuffed animals, while their parents browsed the stalls of homemade jams and handcrafted quilts. For me, the main event was always the horticulture pavilion, and this year, I had outdone myself. There it was, sitting on the winner's pedestal with a large blue ribbon proudly displayed beside it. My Eternal Memory rose. Its deep crimson petals were like velvet, perfectly formed and holding a scent so rich it seemed to tell a story. A small crowd had gathered, murmuring their appreciation. I stood to the side, trying to look modest, but inside, my heart was soaring. This wasn't just a flower. It was a testament to the love and dedication Richard and I had poured into our garden for over 40 years. "Well, well, Elaine, another year, another blue ribbon. You must have a whole room dedicated to these by now." I didn't have to turn to know who it was. The voice was smooth, but it always carried an undercurrent I could feel in my bones. I turned and offered a polite smile. "David, how nice of you to stop by." David Henderson was a man who wore his ambition like one of his expensive suits, impeccably tailored but a size too tight. He was around 60, with silver hair that was always perfectly in place and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He'd been my and Richard's rival in the local gardening circuit for decades, always playing second fiddle and never learning to enjoy the music. It's a magnificent specimen, he said, gesturing toward the rose with a manicured hand. Truly, but then your whole garden is. I can see it from my upstairs window, you know. A sea of color. Thank you, David. Richard and I put a lot of work into it, I said, deliberately mentioning my late husband's name. It was a gentle reminder that the garden was a shared legacy, not just my hobby. He nodded, his gaze lingering on the prize-winning bloom. It's a shame, really, he said, his tone shifting to one of mock sympathy. All that land, all that beauty. It seems like such a waste for a garden like that to be seen by just one person. The comment hung in the air between us, sharp and pointed as a thorn. It wasn't a compliment or an observation. It was a judgment. He was insinuating that my life, my garden, my legacy was small, insignificant. I felt a familiar flash of irritation, but I pushed it down, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. This was just David being David, full of sour grapes as always. I gave him a serene smile. Oh, I don't think it's a waste at all. It was never meant for a crowd. It was meant for family. His own smile tightened at the edges. He could see he wasn't getting under my skin. Of course, he said smoothly. Well, my congratulations, as always. He gave a slight nod and disappeared back into the throng of the fair. I watched him go, the cheerful sounds of the fair suddenly seeming distant. His words echoed in my mind. A waste for a garden like that to be seen by just one person. It was a petty, jealous remark, nothing more. But as I stood there, a strange and unwelcome feeling began to creep in. It was a tiny seed of unease, a feeling that his casual cruelty was not so casual after all. It felt less like an insult and more like a probe, as if he were testing the waters for something. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the thought. It was just David. It had to be. A few days after the fair, I was in my living room, making my rounds with the watering can. The large picture window at the back of my house offers a perfect, unobstructed view of Marcus and Jenna's backyard. It was one of the reasons I'd been so thrilled when they bought the place. I could watch my grandchildren play someday, I thought. It felt cozy, connected. Now, that proximity felt different. As I gave my orchid a drink, a flash of movement next door caught my eye. I glanced up and froze, the watering can hovering mid-air. There, standing near the edge of their patio, was Jenna. And she wasn't alone. She was talking to David Henderson. My first thought was that I was mistaken. What on earth would David be doing in my son's backyard? But there was no mistaking his perfectly coiffed silver hair or the expensive blazer he wore even on a Tuesday afternoon. They were standing close, their heads bent together in a way that felt far too familiar for a casual chat between neighbors. They looked thick as thieves. I moved closer to the window, partially hiding myself behind the curtain. I watched as Jenna laughed at something he said, a high, tinkling sound I could faintly hear through the glass. Then, she did something that made a cold knot form in my stomach. She raised her arm and pointed, her finger tracing a line directly across my property. She was pointing at my rose garden. David nodded slowly, a thoughtful expression on his face. He said something, and Jenna listened intently, her expression serious now. They looked less like neighbors and more like business partners surveying a plot of land. My plot of land. Suddenly, Jenna's head snapped up, her eyes locking directly onto my window. She saw me. The change was instantaneous. The smile vanished from her face, replaced by a wide-eyed, deer-in-the-headlights panic. She said something sharp and quick to David, took a hasty step back, and practically shooed him toward the side gate. The conversation was over. I stood perfectly still, my heart starting to pound a low, steady drumbeat of suspicion. The whole exchange couldn't have lasted more than 2 minutes, but it had felt charged, secretive, wrong. Less than a minute later, my phone buzzed on the end table. I picked it up. A new text message from Jenna. Saw you at the window. Just ran into Mr. Henderson on his walk and was asking him for some gardening tips. His yard is always so perfect. Nye read the message twice. The cheerful tone, the smiley face. It was all a performance. A lie so blatant it was almost insulting. Asking David Henderson for gardening tips? The man who would poison his own petunias if he thought it would give him an edge over me at the town fair? It was absurd. If she wanted gardening advice, she lived next door to the woman who had just won the blue ribbon for the best rose in the county. The excuse didn't just seem weak. It was a red flag, waving violently in my face. The seed of unease David had planted at the fair began to sprout, growing into a thorny vine of suspicion that was wrapping itself tightly around my heart. Something was going on, and whatever it was, it had to do with my garden, my husband's garden, and my daughter-in-law was lying to my face about it. The unease from seeing Jenna with David Henderson lingered for the rest of the week, a low-grade fever in the back of my mind. I tried to push it away, telling myself I was being a paranoid old woman, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the other shoe was about to drop. I just never imagined it would drop with such a deafening thud. The phone rang on Thursday evening. It was Jenna. Her voice, when I answered, was so sweet, it could give you a toothache. Elaine, hi, I was just thinking about you, she chirped. Everything all right, Jenna? I asked, my guard immediately up. She only ever called me Elaine when she wanted something or was about to deliver bad news. To her, Mom was a currency she spent when she wanted to sound grateful, usually right after I'd sent the mortgage payment. Oh, everything's fantastic. Actually, that's why I'm calling. So, Marcus and I have been doing a lot of thinking about Thanksgiving, and we've decided to shake things up this year. Start our own little tradition, you know? I stayed silent, a cold feeling spreading through my chest. I knew this wasn't going to be about what time I should bring the pecan pie. Instead of the big, traditional family dinner, she continued, her voice practically bubbling with forced enthusiasm, we're doing a Friendsgiving, just a super casual, modern get-together with our friends. It's going to be all about craft beers and charcuterie boards instead of, stuffy china and formal seating charts. There it was. The shoe had dropped, but the kick was still coming. So, she took a breath, and I could practically hear the fake smile in her voice. We were thinking it would be best if you didn't come this year. The silence that followed was cavernous. I couldn't speak. I couldn't even breathe. My mind was scrambling, trying to process the raw insult of her words. She seemed to take my silence as confusion, not shock. It's just, with you there, it would feel so formal, she explained, as if I were a doddering old fool who didn't understand. It would make everyone feel like they have to be on their best behavior. We just want a relaxed vibe where everyone can let their hair down. You understand, right? I still said nothing. My throat had closed up. The beautiful, warm memories of decades of Thanksgivings, Marcus as a boy with gravy on his chin, Richard carving the turkey at the head of the table, were being systematically erased by her chipper, dismissive tone. Then came the final, brutal blow. But don't you worry, she said brightly. I'll make sure to pack up a nice big plate for you. You can just swing by at the end of the night to pick up some leftovers. That way you won't miss out on my amazing cooking. Leftovers. The word echoed in the dead silence of my house. It was a slap in the face. I wasn't family anymore. I was an obligation, a charity case, being offered the scraps from a party I wasn't welcome at. The matriarch of the family, the woman who was funding the very roof over their heads, was being told to come to the back door for a handout. I finally found my voice, but it was a hollow whisper. I see. Great. I knew you'd get it, she said, completely missing the devastation in my tone. Okay, well, I've got to run. Talk soon. The line went dead. I stood there, holding the phone, until the dial tone started to beep. The shock was beginning to recede, and in its place, something cold and hard was beginning to form. It was a feeling I hadn't felt in a very long time. It was rage. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. The rage I felt after Jenna's phone call burned hot for a few hours, a wildfire consuming every good memory and leaving scorched earth behind. But I am not a woman who lets fire rule her. I am a woman who builds things, and sometimes I am a woman who dismantles them piece by piece with precision and care. By morning, the fire had cooled into something far more dangerous. Ice. I slept surprisingly well. When I woke, the path forward was crystal clear. I didn't reach for my comfortable gardening clothes. Instead, I went to the back of my closet, to the section I hadn't touched since I retired. I pulled out a charcoal gray pantsuit, a crisp silk blouse, and the low leather heels I used to wear when I was about to walk into a boardroom and tell a group of overconfident men why their financial projections were a fantasy. This was my armor. The bank was an oasis of quiet efficiency. The hushed tones, the scent of clean paper, the gentle click of keyboards. It was a world I understood intimately. I sat across from a young, earnest-looking man named Mr. Davies. He had the kind of face that wanted to be helpful. "Mrs. Miller, how can I assist you today?" he asked with a polite smile. I returned the smile, but mine didn't have any warmth in it. It was a tool, nothing more. "I need to place a temporary freeze on an account," I said, my voice even and calm. I slid a piece of paper with the account number across the polished desk. "It's a joint account I share with my son." Mr. Davies typed the number into his computer. "A freeze? Is there a problem? Has the card been compromised?" "You could say that," I replied smoothly. "I've become aware of some unusual and potentially unauthorized future expenditures being planned. I feel it's prudent to lock the account down until I can get some clarity. Let's just cite suspicious activity as the official reason." He nodded, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "Of course, we can certainly do that. Now, just to be clear, this will decline any and all transactions, including automatic payments scheduled to come out of the account." "I'm aware," I said. "That's the point. Then canceling the payment would have been a simple emotional reaction, a tit-for-tat move. But a freeze was different. A freeze was a strategic maneuver. A canceled payment is a statement. A frozen account is a problem. A problem that would land squarely in Marcus's lap when his mortgage payment bounced. He wouldn't get a simple notification that the transfer from Mom didn't happen. He would get an alert from his mortgage company about insufficient funds. He would have to be the one to pick up the phone and call me hat in hand to ask what was going on. I was flipping the board, forcing him to make the next move. "All right, it's done," Mr. Davies said, looking up from his screen. "The account is now frozen. Nothing will go in or out until you personally come in to lift the hold." "Thank you, Mr. Davies. You've been very helpful." I stood up, my movements deliberate and unhurried. As I walked out of the bank and into the bright autumn sunshine, I didn't feel the gut-wrenching pain of a mother betrayed. I didn't feel the sting of being offered leftovers from my own family's table. I felt a cold, quiet sense of power. I had spent my entire career advising people on how to protect their assets. I had just become my own most important client. The first move had been made. Now I would wait. Thanksgiving Day arrived, quiet and gray. The silence in my house was a physical weight. I spent the day trying to distract myself, rereading an old novel and attempting a crossword puzzle. But the words on the page were just black marks, and my mind was a blank. Every tick of the grandfather clock in the hall was a reminder of what I was missing: the sounds of my family, the smell of a roasting turkey, the warmth of a shared tradition. As evening fell, casting long shadows across my lawn, a morbid curiosity got the better of me. I couldn't stand it anymore. I had to see this Friendsgiving for myself. I told myself I just wanted to drive by, to see the cars lining the street and hear the music, to confirm that they were, in fact, having the time of their lives without me. I got in my car and drove the short loop around the block, my headlights off as I turned onto their street. I slowed the car to a crawl as their house came into view. I was expecting to see a home blazing with light, cars parked bumper to bumper, maybe even the silhouettes of people dancing in the windows. But there was nothing. The street was empty. The front of their house was dark, save for a single lamp in the living room. There was no music, no roar of a party, just the same suburban quiet as any other night. My brow furrowed in confusion. Had they canceled it? I pulled the car over to the curb a few houses down, where I had a clear view of their backyard through the slats of the tall privacy fence. And that's when I saw them. They weren't inside. They were gathered in the backyard, illuminated by the cold, white light of the patio lamp. It was Marcus and Jenna, and standing with them was David Henderson. There was a fourth person, a man I didn't recognize, dressed in a sharp business suit that looked completely out of place for a casual holiday get-together. There was no charcuterie board. There was no craft beer. Instead, spread across their patio table under the harsh light was a large, rolled-out piece of paper, a blueprint. My blood ran cold. I watched, frozen, as the man in the suit spoke, gesturing toward the plans. Marcus stood beside him, nodding, his shoulders hunched. Jenna was animated, smiling and pointing at the paper. But it was David's movement that made my heart stop altogether. He stepped forward, toward the fence that separated their yard from mine. He raised his arm and pointed, his finger aimed like a weapon. He wasn't pointing at their yard. He was pointing directly into the heart of my property. He was pointing at my rose garden. And in that horrifying, crystal-clear moment, every piece of the puzzle slammed into place with brutal force. David's sneering comment at the fair, Jenna's clumsy lie about getting gardening tips, the sudden, cruel invention of Friendsgiving. It wasn't a party. It was a business meeting. The lie wasn't just to exclude me. It was a cover, a carefully constructed excuse to get me out of the way so they could stand in the dark and plot the desecration of my husband's memory with my worst enemy. I stared at the scene, at my son and his wife conspiring with my rival. The shock was a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. It was followed by a wave of pain so profound I thought it might actually break me. But then, just as quickly, the pain was washed away by a rising tide of ice-cold clarity. This was a betrayal so complete, so calculated. It was almost a work of art. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb, my movement steady. The hurt was still there, but it was now encased in a shell of pure, unadulterated resolve. They had just shown me their hand. Now it was my turn to play. The drive home was a blur. I don't remember the turns I made or the stoplights I waited for. All I could see was that scene replaying in my mind's eye. The four of them huddled under the cold patio light, carving up my life like a Thanksgiving turkey. When I walked back into my house, the silence I had fled from earlier had returned. But now it was different. It was heavier, suffocating. It was the silence of a tomb. I didn't turn on the lights. I sank into the armchair in my living room, the one that faced the picture window, and stared into the darkness of my own backyard, my garden, my beautiful living memorial to a 40-year love story. and they were going to bulldoze it. My hand trembled as I reached for the photo album on the shelf beside me. I didn't need to flip through it. I knew exactly where the picture was. I opened it to the page, and there we were. Richard and I, 20 years younger, covered in dirt and grinning like fools. He had his arm around my shoulder, and in my hands, I was holding the tiny, fragile sapling that would become the first eternal memory rosebush. I remembered that day so clearly. Richard had dug the hole, and I had placed the rose inside, patting the soil around it like I was tucking a child into bed. "For us," he'd said, "so we'll always remember." A single tear escaped and rolled down my cheek, hot against my cold skin. Then another. The lies started to cascade through my memory, each one sharper than the last. Jenna's fake sweet voice on the phone, talking about a modern Friendsgiving. Her clumsy text message about getting gardening tips. It was all a lie. A smokescreen designed to hide their real intentions. But the sharpest pain, the one that felt like a physical blade twisting in my gut, was Marcus. His silence. His easy, cheerful voice on the phone just last week, thanking me for the money while knowing what they were planning to do. He hadn't just let it happen. He was a part of it. He stood there tonight, nodding along as they plotted to destroy his own father's legacy. He sold me out. For what? To get out of debt? To fund some tacky get-rich-quick scheme to build an event space for people to hold their gender reveal parties and corporate mixers. He was willing to trade 40 years of his family's history, his mother's heart, his father's memory, for a quick buck. The tears weren't just for a garden anymore. They were for my son. The boy I had raised, the man I thought I knew, was gone. In his place was a stranger, a weak, spineless man who stood by and watched his wife and my worst enemy conspire to ruin me. His betrayal wasn't loud and aggressive like Jenna's. It was quiet and passive, and somehow, that made it 1,000 times worse. I sat there in the dark for what felt like hours, the open album on my lap, the ghost of my husband beside me. The loneliness was an ocean, and I was drowning in it. This was the bottom. This was the absolute crushing end of the world I had known. The pain was so complete, so all-consuming, that it burned everything else away. And in the ashes, something new and hard began to form. The grief was still there, but it was being forged into something else. Something cold, sharp, and unbreakable. By morning, the tears were gone. The hollowed-out feeling of grief had been filled with something solid and heavy. Purpose. I didn't go to the garden. I didn't even look out the window at it. I walked directly to the small office off my living room, sat down in front of my computer, and woke the machine from its sleep. The cool blue light of the monitor illuminated my face in the dim room. I was no longer a mother mourning her son. I was Elaine Miller, financial planner, retired but not defunct. I was a strategist, and I was about to liquidate a very bad investment. My fingers moved with a speed and confidence I hadn't felt in years. First, I opened my online banking portal. I navigated to the scheduled transfers. There it was. M. Miller, $2,200. First of the month. I didn't just freeze it this time. I clicked delete. A confirmation box popped up. Are you sure you want to permanently cancel this transaction? I clicked yes without a flicker of hesitation. A green check mark appeared. Transaction canceled. I took a screenshot, the sharp click of the capture tool sounding like a gavel in the quiet room. I saved the file to my desktop. I named it Attachment 1. Next, I opened my phone's photo gallery and found the picture I had taken on Thanksgiving night. It was grainy, shot through the fence slats in the dark, but the image was clear as day. Marcus, Jenna, David Henderson, and the stranger, all gathered around the blueprint like vultures over a carcass. David's hand, pointing directly at my garden. I emailed the photo to myself, downloaded it to the computer, and saved it to the desktop. I named it Attachment 2. Finally, I opened a new email. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for only a moment, not out of doubt, but to compose the most lethally precise words. To marcus.miller@email.com, jenna.lmiller@email.com. Subject: regarding our financial arrangement. Then, I began to type. The click of the keys was the only sound in the house, each one a nail being hammered into the coffin of their plans. Marcus and Jenna, it has come to my attention that your plans for the property I am helping you pay for have changed. I saw your Friendsgiving business meeting, an interesting new holiday tradition, since my life's work and your father's legacy is apparently slated to be bulldozed to make way for this new venture. I see no logical reason to continue financing its demolition. The attached screenshot will confirm that my financial support has been terminated, effective immediately. The second attachment is for your reference, in case you were wondering how I found out. I wish you the best of luck with your startup. I hope you can build it on the ashes of my roses. I read it over once. It was cold. It was brutal. It was perfect. I dragged attachment 1.jpg and attachment 2.jpg into the email. They appeared at the bottom. Two perfect little bombs waiting to detonate. My cursor moved to the send button. There was no dramatic pause, no deep breath. My entire life had been about making calculated decisions based on clear evidence. This was the easiest decision I had ever made. I clicked the button. It was done. The declaration of war had been sent. After I clicked send, I didn't move from my chair. I just sat there in the quiet of my office, listening to the hum of the computer. There was no anxiety, no regret, only a profound and chilling sense of stillness, the calm that sits in the eye of a hurricane you have just set in motion. I didn't need to see the chaos next door. I could picture it perfectly. I imagined the email arriving with a harmless little ping on both of their phones. Perhaps they were in their kitchen, drinking coffee, still congratulating themselves on their cleverness. Jenna would have opened it first, her brow furrowed in annoyance at an email from me. I could see the color draining from her face as she read, her skin turning the color of ash. I could picture her phone clattering as it slipped from her suddenly nerveless fingers. Marcus would look up, confused. "What is it?" And she would just point, speechless, at her screen. He would pull out his own phone, his hands starting to tremble as he read my cold, precise words. He would see the screenshot of the canceled payment. Then he would see the grainy photo of himself, standing in the dark, betraying his own father's memory. There would be no room for denial. Then, the phones would start to ring. In my mind's eye, the first call would be from their investor, the man in the suit. He would be polite, professional, and utterly ruthless. Men like that have a sixth sense for trouble, and they run from it like a fire. "Marcus," he'd say, his voice all business, "I just received a rather illuminating email from your mother. It seems this project has some complications I wasn't aware of. Family disputes, potential legal entanglements over the property. It's a bit messy for my taste. I'm afraid I'm going to have to pull my funding. Best of luck to you." Click. And just like that, the foundation of their dream would evaporate. The money would be gone. Their entire plan, their ticket out of debt, would be dead in the water. That's when the screaming would start. I could practically hear Jenna's voice, shrill with panic and fury. "This is your fault! You were supposed to have her under control. You're her son." And Marcus, weak and cornered, would lash back. "My fault? This whole insane idea was yours. Bulldozing my mother's garden, Lying about Thanksgiving? You pushed this whole thing." The dream they had built together would crumble into a pile of rubble and debt. The image of themselves as a clever, modern power couple would shatter, revealing the desperate, frightened people they really were. They would be trapped in that beautiful house, the one I was no longer paying for, with nothing but their failure and the bitter taste of mutual blame. I closed my eyes, picturing their faces, twisted with anger and fear. I had not just taken their money, I had taken their fantasy. I had held up a mirror to their greed and weakness, and they were not enjoying the reflection. The storm had arrived right on schedule, and I, the architect of it all, just sat in the quiet, listening to the thunder roll. It was 2 days before he came. 2 days of absolute silence from the house next door. I had expected it. The shock had to wear off, the blame had to be assigned, and the full, crushing weight of their failure had to settle in before he would find the courage or the desperation to face me. The knock on my front door was soft, hesitant. Not the confident rap of my son coming for a visit, but the timid tap of a stranger, or a child who knows he's in trouble. I opened the door, and there he stood. He looked terrible. His eyes were red-rimmed and puffy, with dark circles underneath that spoke of sleepless nights. His clothes were rumpled, and he hadn't shaved. He looked smaller somehow, diminished. He wouldn't meet my gaze, his eyes fixed on the welcome mat at his feet, as if it were the most interesting thing in the world. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. I just stepped back and held the door open. He shuffled inside like a man walking to his own execution, and I closed the door behind him. The click of the latch was unnaturally loud in the heavy silence. He followed me into the living room and stood awkwardly in the middle of the rug, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. I sat in my usual armchair, the one facing the window, and waited. I didn't offer him a seat. I didn't offer him a drink. I offered him nothing but my undivided, silent attention. The quiet stretched on, thick and unbearable. It was a weapon, and I wielded it with precision. I watched him crumble under its weight. His shoulders began to shake, and a choked sob escaped his lips. Finally, his eyes, glistening with tears, met mine for the first time. "I'm so sorry, Mom," he whispered, his voice cracking. I remained silent. Sorry wasn't enough. It was a word, a puff of air. I wanted the truth. He finally broke. The confession came pouring out of him in a torrent of shame and regret. "My job, it's not stable. They're talking about layoffs after the new year. We've been living on fumes for months, just trying to keep up appearances," he stammered, tears now streaming freely down his face. "We're drowning, Mom. Credit cards, the car payment, the mortgage. We're so far in over our heads." He sank onto the edge of the sofa, his head in his hands. "This whole event space thing, it was Jenna's idea. But I went along with it. It was stupid, I know, but it felt like the only way out, a lifeline. David Henderson promised us an investor, a quick build. It all seemed so easy." He looked up at me, his face a mask of misery. I knew it was wrong. Every time I looked at the garden, I felt sick. Dad's garden. But I was too much of a coward to stand up to her, to the debt. I was too scared to just come to you and tell you the truth, that we were failing. He let out a shuddering breath. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry I was weak. I'm sorry I let this happen. I am so, so sorry." He sat there, weeping, the confession hanging in the air between us. I listened to every word. I cataloged every excuse, but I felt nothing. No pity, no surge of maternal forgiveness. The pain he had caused was a thing of the past, a scar that had already formed. What I was hearing now was not a heartfelt apology. It was the final report of a failed enterprise. And the truth was, it was all too little, far too late. When Marcus finally ran out of words, the room fell silent again. His pathetic, tear-soaked apology hung in the air between us, but it didn't touch me. It was like listening to a weather report about a storm that had already passed. The damage was done. All that was left was the cleanup. I let the silence sit for a long moment, letting him stew in the wreckage he had made. Then, slowly, I stood up. I didn't look at him. I walked over to the old oak filing cabinet that stands in the corner of the room, the place where I keep the important documents of my life. My own will, Richard's death certificate, and the paperwork for every major financial decision I have ever made. My fingers found the folder instantly. It was labeled Marcus, 412 Willow Creek Lane. My movements were calm and deliberate. I walked back to the coffee table and placed the thick file down in front of him. The soft thud of the paper on the wood was like the sound of a judge's gavel. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with confusion. What is this?" I didn't answer. I opened the folder to a page that had been marked with a small yellow tab years ago. I slid it across the table until it was directly in front of him. It was the original purchase and sale agreement for his house. My finger, steady and sure, tapped a single highlighted paragraph in the addendum. "You forgot about this, Marcus," I said. My voice was quiet, devoid of all emotion. It was the voice I used to use when I explained the unforgiving nature of a contract to a client. He squinted, wiping tears from his eyes as he leaned forward to read. I watched his face as he scanned the dense legal text. I knew the words by heart. I had written them myself with my lawyer before I ever gave them a single cent. The clause was simple, direct, and ironclad. It read, "As a condition of the financial contribution made by Elaine Miller, hereafter referred to as the financial contributor, the buyers agree to preserve and maintain the established heritage rose garden located on the adjacent property. In the event of any action taken by the buyers that would significantly alter, damage, or remove said garden, the financial contributor reserves the right to recall 100% of all contributed funds, an amount equivalent to 30% of the home's original purchase price, payable in full within 90 days of written notice." I watched the blood drain from his face. His skin went from pale to a ghastly waxen white. His jaw went slack. The dawning horror in his eyes was absolute. This wasn't a punishment I had devised in a fit of anger last week. This was a fail-safe, a contingency plan that had been quietly waiting, dormant, in a filing cabinet for years. It was proof that, on some level, I had always known this could happen. I had hoped I was wrong, but I had planned as if I were right. He looked up from the paper, his gaze bouncing between the contract and my face. He was seeing me clearly for the first time in a long time, not as his soft-hearted mother, but as the woman who had managed millions of dollars in assets, who understood risk, and who always protected her investments. "Checkmate," I said softly. He flinched as if I had struck him. The awe and terror that washed over his face was my answer. He finally understood. He hadn't just been outplayed in the last week. He had been beaten before the game even began. I stood there, not as a mother in her living room, but as a queen on a chessboard, having just protected her kingdom with a move he never saw coming. A few weeks have passed. The last of the autumn leaves have fallen, carpeting the ground in gold and red, and the air has a new, sharp bite to it. Winter is on its way. I'm in my garden, my sanctuary, bundled in a warm sweater. The beds have been pruned and prepared for the coming frost, a neat and tidy landscape of dormant potential. The work is satisfying, a ritual of closure and preparation for the new growth that will come in the spring. The garden is safe. It's quieter now, but it feels more alive than ever. I was pruning the last of the eternal memory bushes when the realtor came. I watched from my yard as she hammered a sign into the lawn next door. The sign was a bold, clean red and white, and the words were stark and final: for sale. Marcus and Jenna were gone. They had no choice, of course. With the investor gone and my 30% contribution recalled, they were financially ruined. The beautiful house they couldn't afford on their own was now an anchor dragging them down. Selling was their only option. I don't know where they went, and I haven't asked. The house stands empty now, a silent monument to their greed and folly. As I snipped a final thorny branch, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, wiping the dirt from my gloves before I looked at the screen. It was a text from a number I didn't have saved, but I knew who it was from. The message was short, just 6 words. "I get it now, Mom. I'm sorry." I read the words once, then twice. There was a time when a message like that from my son would have broken my heart or filled it with hope. Now, it just felt like an echo, the final fading sound of a door closing a long way off. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel forgiveness. I felt a quiet, sad finality. Some things, once broken, can't be put back together. I slipped the phone back into my pocket without replying. My gaze fell upon a small, tight bud on one of the younger rose bushes, one I had planted this past summer. It was late in the season for a new bloom, a small miracle of defiance against the coming cold, a tiny promise of life, determined to push its way into the world on its own terms. A sense of peace settled over me, calm and deep. My family, as I had known it, was gone. That was a loss I would carry with me. But my legacy, Richard's legacy, was secure. And in fighting for it, I had found something I didn't even know I had lost: my own strength. I was not just a widow, a mother, a gardener. I was the woman who had built this life, and I was the woman who would protect it. Alone, perhaps, but whole. I reached out and gently touched the new bud, and for the first time in a long time, I smiled. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment 1 below. If not, feel free to comment 0 so we know and can improve future videos. To hear the next story, click the box on the left. Thank you for watching.